Hello and welcome to Level Up and Friends, where those of us from the video game and comic book store Level Up Entertainment get together some friends and we discuss a different topic each week. This week we're talking our favorite Nintendo Entertainment System games. Just so happens to work out, we decided to do this on just the day after the 35th anniversary of Super Mario Brothers.
Woohoo!
From Level Up Entertainment this week, I'm Scott, and with me I have...
Hi, I'm Sean. I'm one of the owners of Level Up Entertainment, and I have been playing video games since the Nintendo came out. That's all I got.
We also have...
I feel like that one didn't work, so...
It's all good. Just plow on through. That's how we do it on this show. And we also have Chris Randazzo with us as well.
Hi, everybody. I'm Chris. I'm from StoneAgeGamer.com. I'm co-founder of Geekade.com. I host Stone Age Gamers podcast. I run their social media, and I have been gaming since I saw an Atari 2600 in my cousin's bedroom when I was just a wee lad. I am a Nintendo fanatic, and I'm really excited to talk about NES games with all of you lovely people.
Yes. So without too much further ado, we can kind of start getting into it. I think the NES might be my favorite retro console. I don't know what it is. Something about the games. I love the simplicity to them. I love collecting the games and having all the cartridges lined up. I think it's the uniformity I enjoy for my OCD self. But a big part of that is nostalgia. We did grow up with the NES.
Mm-hmm.
The first thing I had was an Atari 2600, but all my friends had Nintendo. And I was desperate to have one. I remember when we got one finally, we got it out of a want ad from the newspaper. It came with 3 games. And I got a 4th, and that I begged my parents for. And those are the only games I had for it as a kid. But it came with Super Mario Brothers, Duck Hunt, and the Zapper, Ice Hockey, and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the first game. And then I begged them for Jurassic Park when that came out.
Oh, wow.
That's unfortunate. Those are two unfortunate games right there. Actually, I have Turtles. I picked out of my collection.
Listen, I loved as a kid. I played so much Ice Hockey, though, because it's a 2-player game, and I had a little brother.
Ice Hockey's great.
I love
It's
Ice
so
Hockey.
good, and the music in that game does not get it doesn't get the recognition it deserves. That game was composed by a woman named Soyo Oka, and she's the one who did the music to tie it all into the anniversary to the Super Mario All-Stars version of all the Mario games. She also wrote all the original music for Mario Kart. She's amazing. Look her up, Soyo Oka.
Whoa!
Great soundtrack to Ice Hockey. It's such wonderful classic NES music.
That is an amazing bit of trivia. Yeah. This is the kind of stuff you get when you invite Chris on your podcast.
The only trivia I was going to bring to that game is I liked playing with 3 big guys because you could hit people harder.
Yeah, the skinny guys could zoom in and out of everybody. You get 1 skinny guy and 2 fat guys. That was my team on Ice Hockey.
Do you remember?
I was going to say there's a strategy the all fat guys is a noob strategy because you'll just plow through. And you'll probably be all right. But if you're playing against somebody who knows the game, they're going to have the actual mix of players, and they're going to be getting their medium guy through and passing to the skinny guy who's going to run circles around your fat guys, scoring you every time. And I love that game.
So
that
medium
game
guys are
surprising
pointless.
amount of depth.
I only remember 2 of the teams on it because my friend and I would only ever play as the U.S. versus USSR, and I think the other teams Canada and Sweden or something.
Sweden was my go-to. I love the colors on Sweden.
We would fight so hard to be who was going to be America and who was going to be the USSR.
I adore Ice Hockey, but I was more of a Blades of Steel guy myself.
I also love that game.
I couldn't get into Blades of Steel. I tried to. I tried to get into Blades of Steel. I don't know. I think it was a little bit more complex than Ice Hockey. And I was just I like it being more simple. Where and I don't know. I guess I got used to the horizontal orientation for the rink.
Oh yeah,
Blades of Steel had that too.
Did it? I remember it being.
I think you're thinking of NHL.
Yeah, NHL '94 and all that stuff. Those are where they started getting all vertical.
But with Blades of Steel, I owned both Ice Hockey and Blades of Steel as a kid, and I love that we just jumped right into talking about NES games with Ice Hockey because it's a great representation of the kind of stuff that was happening on the NES that wasn't happening anywhere else when it came out. Because it's an early title, right? I don't think it was launched, but it's very close to.
It's got to be in launch window.
Well, Ice Hockey was kind of in that second tier. Like if you look at the box for ice hockey, it's when they were transitioning out of the black box stuff, you know. So it
Right. They
still
were
has
starting
that.
to do the silver.
Yeah, it still has that kind of strip where the
Mhm.
writing is like ice hockey, but it's a solid blue box and a photograph. Came out around the same time as like RC Pro Am, I think. So
Yeah,
it's probably like 88, I think.
but it was still like, it was this representation of real life sport in a way that was accessible and fun, which
Oh my
kind of
God,
is what
yeah.
Nintendo went on to just be known for.
I
And it was
love
something
NES
that was
sports games.
right. Like what other system can you say that about, really? Like I love the sports games for a system, and like NES they were just fun,
Yeah,
right?
they were really focused on the simplicity. They had 2 buttons. There was only so many technical limitations, but once you got into the 16-bit era with Genesis and you started seeing a lot more complex and realistic things, I understand why people really dug that stuff, but it kind of really left me behind because I'm not a huge sports fanatic as it is. So
That's true. You could say
once,
the Genesis is known for having
oh,
great sports
definitely,
games.
Yeah,
Genesis was
I was gonna play
I
Genesis.
rescind my comment about
Yeah. Um, I will
Nintendo and
say
Genesis.
I prefer the more arcadey takes on sports games just in general, because usually like once a console generation I'll get an itch for like, oh, I want to play a football game or something. I generally gravitate more towards like an NFL Blitz versus a Madden, stuff like
mhm.
that, or like NBA Jam. I was super stoked when they brought that back on PlayStation 3. Like those are more what I like to look for in them. But I guess with that we'll start going into some of our favorite NES games. And when I was thinking about it, I realized most of my favorite games are very pedestrian in my choices. Because I'm gonna
That's
say,
okay.
yeah,
We're not going to slag you.
yeah,
Like you're not
because
like getting deep enough cuts.
I'm gonna start off the
Oh, you like
discussion.
Mario?
Yeah, well, I was gonna start off the discussion. My favorite Mario game for 2D is Super Mario Brothers 3. I just love that game. Something about the way it handles. Like I like to use it as an example of like how the beginning and end of a console cycle and people developers being able to see what they can do with it. Like look at Super Mario
Yeah,
Brothers versus Super Mario Brothers 3 just on a graphical standpoint.
Mhm.
yeah.
Mind blowing
Yeah, it's a huge difference.
progression.
Super
Um,
Mario Brothers 3 is darn near platforming perfection. I mean, it's my favorite. I'm more of a Super Mario World kind of guy.
I was
Uh,
gonna ask because I think it's like
that's the
a
debate.
split, right?
Yeah.
Like
right,
who
it's
who do
just
you
like
like?
Mega Man 2 or Mega Man 3. It's
Oh,
Mario
that's
World
another
3
tough
or
one.
Mario World, and I fall in the Mario World camp. But I mean, absolutely no slag to Mario 3. It's one of the best games ever. It's easily one of my favorite NES
And
games.
I'll say the only reason I like it more than Super Mario World is just because I played it as a kid. I did not have a
Mm,
Super Nintendo.
Hmm,
So the nostalgia
yeah.
aspect, like I played a lot of my Mario World at other friends' houses when that was, when Super Nintendo was new. But like Mario 3 is it's just that nostalgia edge, and it's got that like NES charm to it. Like I
yeah.
really like that their 8-bit aesthetics that they had.
Well,
That
why don't we backpedal just a little bit because I
yeah.
feel like we were going to go talk about all of our histories with the NES, and
Oh,
that
sure,
might
sure.
be a really good groundwork when we're talking about our different respective
Yeah.
feelings on things. So, so Scott, you got yours out of one ad, right?
Yep.
And
Yeah,
you
yeah, we did
got
start with it. We just went right into
Yeah,
we
ice
just went
no,
right into
the
I was
Mario,
like, all
anticipation,
Duck Hunt,
right,
Ice
the
Hockey, and Ninja
anticipation is
Turtles. Okay.
real. Yeah.
All right. What about you? What about you, Sean?
that's it. You know what? I have a very vivid memory of getting my Nintendo, and I had played it before I got it. Right, I was familiar with it. My neighbor who lived, he shared a backyard. Like I have a backyard in a suburb, neighborhood where there didn't used to be a fence, so you could just walk all into other people's yards. And he was an older kid who had an Atari 2600 and an NES, and I would go over there and just like knock on the door, like maybe like 3 or 4 years old, just to play his video games. And it must have been, I'm trying to pinpoint exactly when I got it, like which Christmas it was, but it came with Duck Hunt, track and field, or not track and field.
World
Yeah,
class track meet.
that's it. World class track meet, because track and field's a different game. Uh,
Yeah.
and the power pad and the zapper. It was like the 3-in-1 combo with Super Mario Brothers,
I will say
and it
those.
was in the giant box. But like that wasn't launched, so it wasn't the first year. But I was very young. Like I must have been about 5.
I want to say that
Anyway,
was 86, 87.
it probably was.
That was closer to 1990, I think.
Was it
Okay.
really? So I played it for a while at Neighbors then, and my memory is very foggy. But I do remember getting it for that Christmas. My mom ran out of wrapping paper because the box was so big since it had the power pad in it.
Yeah.
So like all of those sides were covered except for the one back. And I was like, I know exactly what that is. Like that's the Nintendo. And I was so excited knowing that I was going to get a Nintendo on Christmas. That like that was probably one of the best Christmases ever, just because of that Nintendo.
88. Sorry.
Yeah, that makes sense then.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. But I had been playing it for quite a while. Like, so I remember getting, Zelda and Blades of Steel and some of the earlier games, like the Turtles game, Ghostbusters, because I was a kid and in the 80s and really bad at picking games.
Oh, I mean, I would have been all over that game if I knew it existed as a kid.
I'm really glad you dodged that bullet, Scott, because that's an atrocious title.
What was that?
Ghostbusters?
Oh, right. That's right. I thought you were talking about Ninja Turtles again. I was like, wait, didn't he have that one?
I'll be honest.
Ninja Turtles is also bad.
I'll be honest.
It is. Not as bad as Ghostbusters.
Yeah, Ghostbusters is borderline unplayable.
As a kid, I would have liked Ghostbusters.
But, so I grew up playing Nintendo games, and it completely shaped who I became as a human being to the point that I opened a video game store to sell Nintendo games. So that's my short, but not so short backstory.
Well, what about you, Chris?
Yeah.
Well, kind of a similar situation. My first NES was also the one with the power pad. I got an Atari 2600 Junior from a KB Toys in the Hamilton Mall. And,
Everything goes full circle.
Right?
Yeah.
I just loved that thing backwards and forwards. I was obsessed with it, but I didn't really travel outside, hang out with friends that also had video games at the time. And so that's what video games were to me, were the Atari 2600. I didn't really go to arcades or anything like that. And I just obsessed over the box art and how glorious all that was. And then eventually, my friend Joey, who lived behind me, was like, you got to play my Nintendo. I was like, what's a Nintendo? So I went over to his house and he shows me Super Mario Brothers. And it was just this moment.
Oh yeah, I know that going from Atari 2600 to Super Mario Brothers, as my cousin had, it's the first time I saw it.
Right?
He had the one with Duck Hunt, and I remember him shooting at the screen and killing a duck, and I couldn't comprehend it.
That's the same thing for me. First it was, wait, the screen moves? Like it scrolls? That's incredible.
It's a bush, and I could tell that it's a bush.
It looks like what it's supposed to be.
Yeah. And then it was Duck Hunt, and he showed me shooting at the screen and the ducks and the dog, and I was just absolutely in love. So we begged my parents to get one, and it must have been like a year later we finally got it. And so I'd played a handful of games over at friends' houses and whatnot, but we finally got it. We got it with the Mario Duck Hunt World Class Track Meet, that triple pack, which I just still love to this day. The power pad's amazing. And
do you still have yours?
I do. I play it with my kids now, actually, because World Class Track Meet's still pretty fun. One of the games I wanted to talk about was actually a power pad game, Short Order and Explode, which was a later power pad game that's just super fun. Especially when you get a couple of kids just like running back and forth on the pad. And you're basically playing Simon with your feet to build giant burgers. It's a fantastic game, but and then it just it swelled from there. The Legend of Zelda was another life changer for me. The Super Mario Brothers Super Show, watching that every day after school. Zelda 2 right back here was another huge game for me. I loved Zelda 2 so much. Obsessed over it, and any games I could get my hands on. I rented games all the time, and
I remember renting games. Man, it was a little bit of a rolling the dice, I'll say. Sometimes you get something great, and sometimes you get some, more often than not, you get something terrible. Because I didn't have Nintendo Power, and for instance, my friends didn't like.
Hang on, Scott. Let's back up just a bit before you talk about Nintendo. Not having Nintendo Power. Like, we should talk about the fact that to pick these games, most kids didn't have access to any information about what these games actually were, other than
just the boxes.
Well, that's where I was going with. So, like, for example, none of my friend groups played Mega Man, so I never played those games until I was way older. Like, there was just a big blind spot that I had because I didn't subscribe to the magazine and I didn't have friends that talked about it. So because of that, I also didn't really get into Zelda until later either. But I was more aware of that because it had a cartoon.
Hmm.
But yeah, like I was hoping someone would bring that up, that idea that like you would have to roll the dice when whether buying or renting a game. And oftentimes, like I mentioned before, being a stupid kid in the 80s, like you saw the licensed characters have it,
Mhm.
they all had their own games, Ghostbusters, Ninja Turtles, I mentioned, uh, you name it. Who Framed Roger Rabbit, if you happen to see that movie and want an NES game that existed. And it would be really unfortunate if you picked that one up. Or
Yeah,
like if
that
you
was your
lived
whole
in
weekend.
Casey,
Yeah,
right? Yeah.
I
And
will.
you would do that.
Yeah,
You would,
I
you
will
would get
say.
these games that you just commit to them though. Because
I,
like as bad as they were, you
mhm,
were a little
They're what
kid
you had.
that's all you
and
had.
they
Yeah.
were what you had for the weekend. And like, you know what? The Ninja Turtles are still in the game, so you're still getting to play as the Ninja Turtles. As brutally difficult as it is, you just keep playing it and playing and coming back to it.
Hmm.
I will
It's
say, I think
different.
talking about the license games on there, I think the NES had a surprisingly good ratio of NES games that are licensed that are good versus bad, because you could just as easily pick up DuckTales
Hmm.
and have an amazing weekend, or most of the Disney stuff that you would find.
Uh, Counterpoint. I bought Mickey Mousecapades as a child because Mickey Mouse was on the cover, and
Hmm.
that game sucks.
Well, that's because Mickey's bad to begin with.
That game is terrible.
Now, a
It's
lot of
brutal
people
for
like
a
to slag
child.
on LJN, but I used to love Jaws for NES, and I'd never
I
even
think
seen the darn movie.
I think
I
Jaws
love that
is
as a kid
fine.
too.
Yeah,
Jaws is
it's a
great.
very arcadey, shallow game, but that it works on NES. And as a kid, like it's the mindless fun. If I got
Mhm.
that for a weekend, it wouldn't be so bad. But then I would get something like X-Men, and it's just indecipherable mess.
Right. Like
You
it's
Mm.
know?
not as like Jaws. I think there's more of a spectrum, really. Like I think
Yeah.
in hindsight, we can say like the Capcom games, licensed games, were actually really great on the Nintendo.
Hmm.
But like there were so many
LJN was hit and
LJN
miss.
games. They were just churning them out. And then there were other studios doing the same thing, and they were oftentimes not just like not good games, but like unplayable or like you said, indecipherable. Like
Yeah.
if you didn't have the manual, like God forbid you rented it from a place and didn't get, like photocopy the manual to
Hmm.
tell you that the select button is the only way to switch your weapon on, and then if you don't like press it first, you can't attack, or like.
Did you guys ever spend a weekend trying to figure out what the heck you were supposed to do in Bart versus the Space Mutants?
Yes,
No, my cousins had that,
yes.
so I played it at their house, and I was like, I don't need to rent this.
What a weird game.
No, sorry, they
You
had
got
Bart
it.
versus the World. That's the one I played as a kid.
I never played that one. I gave up after Bart versus the Space Mutants.
No,
Like,
that was the right move.
I'm
They were
not doing
bad.
this anymore.
That is a perfect example of a licensed game that lures you in, like The Simpsons. Man, it was the hotness. It was the big thing, and that game came out, and you're like, it's Bart. It's hard. It's that game is borderline unplayable because there are some like conditions in the game that you can't get past if you do it wrong. Apparently, I'm
Yeah,
not
yeah.
being specific because
No,
I don't remember, but
you can soft lock the game. Bart
yeah,
versus the Space Mutants specifically, because Bart versus World had like level select like Mega Man, so you can not play the parts you don't like as much. But I will say like some games that have a really
so
bad
bad.
rap now that like look really bad in retrospect. Like we talked a little bit about it in the Back to the Future episode, but that's really not that bad a game. It's
No,
just not a very
I
good
will fight
adaptation of
you.
Back to the Future.
I will fight you. That game is awful.
Back
But
to the Future was a game that my friend Joey and I rented. I had never seen the movie, and he said, "Oh, you've got to see." He was talking about that movie and how great it was. And we went to go see what game were we going to rent, and we saw that there was a Back to the Future game. I was like, "I trust you. Let's rent it." So we went back to his house, and we walked right back to the rental store and says, "I don't want this. I want my money back." And they wouldn't give us our money back, and we said, "Fine." Take the game. We'll just not play video games this weekend, or we'll play something we own
we'll just go
because
outside.
just
That's what
no.
I'm saying. I'm right there with you, Chris. Yes, Sky. I think you're gonna lose this one because like that game
All right.
has one song, except. Or, I'm sorry. Let me correct myself. There are two songs in that game. There's a song that plays throughout the entire game that's just.
Listen, Mario Brothers has 4 songs.
And then there's a Jenny Be Good level. If you can get that far, there's just this crappy 8-bit Jenny Be Good song.
Mhm.
And
It's
that game is. Oh my
it's
god, I
a
hate
perfectly
it.
playable arcadey kind of game. It's not good, but
No, it is not perfectly
it-
playable.
Collision detection's terrible. You get
it's
taken
better
out
than
by
it's
bowling balls.
anyway. I want this podcast to mostly focus on things that we like. So let's move on
That's
to
a
the
good point.
games
Okay.
that we want that we are our favorites and we would like to talk about.
I'm sorry, you just triggered some flashbacks, and
I will stand on that hill that Back to the Future and some other of those games aren't as bad as people make them out to be for comedic effect online.
Hey man, I will defend E.T. to the death. I loved that game.
I think E.T.'s fine.
E.T. is fine, especially considering this.
Well,
look, I was a little kid, and you pushed the button on the controller, and E.T. made a fart noise. Dude, there was nothing else I needed out of life.
Dude, there are some real garbage on the 2600 that people don't even talk about, but they talk about it because it's E.T.
But you're right, Scott. You're right. Let's talk about positive things.
So, Sean, what's one of your favorite NES games you would like to talk about?
Oh man, so I have much like when we were talking about Super Nintendo, I started writing out like a list of games that I wanted to like mention, and it just becomes like untenably long that you can't possibly talk about it, which is cool. The Nintendo like spawned so many indelible franchises that we still have today, you know. But I think that I wanted to talk about like Mega Man the most, because Mega Man was one of those game series that I remember playing the first game and thinking it was cool, but not like enjoying it very much. Like I remember hitting a wall, you know, with the Gutsman level with the platforms. It's really hard to figure out the timing until you're an adult and you realize, oh, it's when it's under the circle, and then you have to jump.
That thing on the left, that's when it's going to go down.
Right. But as a kid, I couldn't do it. And then, you know, Mega Man 2 came out, and I remember having this, it was like a game guide sort of, but it was multiple games, and it was spiral bound. It was like a blue cover.
I know which one you're talking about.
Do you know? Right?
Yeah, like, I know that one.
I loved it. I got it like a book fair, and it had Mega Man 2 featured in it. And I remember looking at the levels and thinking they looked like super cool, because they had like the Airman stage had like the demon head thing. And I eventually rented that game. I never owned it until I became an adult, and I purchased it in Japan, and I bought like all of the Rockman titles, which is what they call Mega Man in Japan. But I remember, long story short, I played that game and I fell in love with it. And I played most of the other games on the Nintendo until I think 5, because 5 was when it started to be well into the Super NES's life, and I had moved on. But Mega Man on the Nintendo felt like such an evolution of video games happening in real time, where the controls were unbelievably tight and responsive. The graphics were like stylized enough to kind of overcome the limitations of the system. You know, they can only show so many colors, but they're using them in really interesting ways. And the music is just, it slaps. Like, it's just, it doesn't matter if you like video game music or not. You listen to the music from Mega Man 2 and you're like, this music's amazing. And like, to this day, people are still covering tracks from it. And I just felt, and like the series was, you know, you can say it like too iterative as it went on, but like Mega Man 2 and 3 are just so phenomenal.
I would say I say Mega Man 1 through 3 are the perfect example of having a good idea and then refining it to perfection. Because after 3, there's not, I mean, obviously you can make new levels with new kinds of gimmicks and new power-ups and stuff, but the core of the game was basically done. You didn't have to do it.
Right. Yeah,
I would agree. 4 introduced the charge shot, which kind of intrinsically changed the way you played the game, where you're now constantly charging and waiting to do all that kind of stuff. Also, 4 is probably my least favorite numbered Mega Man game on the NES until you get to,
you don't like Ringman and Dustman?
Not particularly. Like, I mean, I think 5 is pretty cool. Favorite? I think 6 has got some really good stuff in it. 4 just doesn't rub me the right way, man.
But that's a good point. Like 4 is where it started to lose me because of the charge shot, because it kind of broke that flow of the game that 2 and 3 had like really mastered.
And it also obscured the music, which was such a big part of the game. Now you're gonna the whole time you're hearing that instead of the music.
Really good point. But like with 2 and 3, it just felt like the coolest video games. You know, video games could be anything. You could get better at them. They were fairer. They were still challenging. They were interesting. Like, you never knew what you were going to see next. They rewarded replaying it, you know, because there were secrets to unlock, and you could get better by picking the right path with the Robot Masters. And then just like the story behind the game, the fact that Mega Man 2 Chris, you could probably tell the story better than I could, but like to my recollection, and correct me if I'm wrong, it was kind of a passion project from the creator of the series. He didn't really have the green light at Capcom to make a sequel to Mega Man 1, but he wanted to do it, so he worked with a small team, and like after hours, they stayed in the office and just kept working to make this game until they were like, "Here, we made a game," and they're like, "Oh, okay, we'll make Rockman 2 then, I guess." I guess that's probably like the too long, not quite accurate, but close enough.
As far as I know, that's pretty. That's just about right. That's what I know of the story.
Yeah, please check my facts out. But I love that idea, and I feel like it shines through in the game. And like, whether it's video games or movies or whatever, that's the kind of stuff that I'm drawn to, where you can see like the passion of the creator, just like they wanted to do it because they just had this idea, and it was super worth doing.
We're playing, my son and I are playing through all the Mario games in order, and we're on Yoshi's Island right now. And there's an actual spot in that game, one of the little talkie blocks where the creators like, we poured our hearts and soul to this game, and I hope you're enjoying it. Like, and you can tell it shows 100% through how much love went into it. And you can read all that in Mega Man 2. Like, that game was just totally made out of a drive. I got to make this game, and it's a masterpiece.
And
before that's the one I would draw.
Yeah. Before we move on from Mega Man, though, there's something that the Mega Man series did that I think was actually very revolutionary for the time that nobody really talks about, and that's choosing your stage. Because as a kid, you have to play these levels over and over to memorize them, but like, you might get really sick of World 1-1 after a certain point. Well, if you get that sick of like Airman stage, you can just move on to Metal Man stage and play that. And like, I think
that's a really good point.
That variety was very novel and was really almost exclusively to that. The only other game I could think of at the time that would let you do that is Silver Surfer.
There were a few other titles, like there was a limited map selection in Bionic Commando. You could pick like which path you were going to go.
Castlevania 2 for Game Boy let you do that.
Yeah, Castlevania 3 had branching paths too.
Castlevania 2 for Game Boy. That one, Belmont's Revenge. You got to choose the different. Got to choose the different which area you want to go to in what order.
And I guess that's a little untrue because one of the games I'm going to bring up later is one of my favorites, has level select in it as well. But it's a novelty for the time. Yeah.
It was definitely not the norm.
Yeah.
Because like it keeps it like these games are games that you have, like we said, you would have to play again and again and again because you die constantly and have to restart because they had that continue system where you'd wipe your progress because of the weird, like arcade, gameplay design seeped into it. But like that kept it fresh, right? Like if you like you said, if you got sick of it, you'd be like, screw Heat Man, I'm gonna try Bubble Man. Maybe you're better at Bubble Man stage.
Like I said, it wouldn't ruin your weekend. You didn't get stuck on a level you can't beat. You can just try another one. Or like my examples, I owned 4 NES games, so I played them a lot. And like Jurassic Park is terrible and was indecipherable as a kid, but I played a lot of it because I had it. But yeah, so Mega Man's great. I'm not gonna make you pick 2 or 3. I think it's great to bring them out together. They're so indelibly linked in quality that I think it's foolish to try to pick one versus the other.
So hard to say.
I'm a little bit of a 2 guy.
I think 2.
And I can respect that. It really.
And I respect 3 as well. Like
me and my co-host on Stone Age Gamer, Dan. He's also a Mega Man 2 guy. And we had a whole episode on Mega Man 2 or 3, and it really just comes down to what it is that you like about Mega Man. What 3 does is, introducing Rush. It introduces the slide. It introduces Proto Man. You get to fight all the Doc robots and the Doc robot stages. Now, some would argue that makes the game too long. I think it makes the game just long enough. It the sensibility of when you pause, how quick it goes into the pause menu that slides up from the bottom and then slides back down. The fact that when you get to Wily's Castle, it doesn't play an entire tune. It just does the lightning bolt and the little line draw while the music is playing. It's happier. Mega Man doesn't slide as much. It's the first game where they tightened his controls, That stuff speaks so much to me. Whereas Mega Man 2 has this raw, just pure love quality to it. Like Mega Man 2's got the weirdness of like, okay, it's not the robot dog, it's just item 2. And it's this little rocket with a giant nose that you jump on that flies that way. It's weird. Yeah. And Heat Man's a giant Zippo later. It's great.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of a two guy too. I love that there is like this is a conversation that I've had with multiple people throughout the years, like at the store between Mega Man 2 and 3. And every time I say I think I like 2 a little bit more, I play 3 and I'm like, this game's really good.
Yeah, but then you can
I
go
like
back and
3 a
play
little bit
two, and
more.
like two's got a difficulty select right at the get go.
Dude, I
It's
love that.
got
That's the opening screen. It's just with
yeah.
that. Talk about limited graphics. It's like a black screen with like a couple of shades of purple and white, and it's that music, and it's so
The
weirdly
building
epic as
going
it
up.
like rises over the building. And there's barely any story to Mega Man games. Like it's mostly in the
Go back and
manual.
learn that mythology. Like, so I started with Mega Man 2. That was my first Mega Man. And like Mega Man 1 was this mythological thing because nobody had it for rent. I didn't see it in any stores. But my one friend, Steve, actually had it and went there for like a Cub Scout meeting. And I was like, you have Mega Man 1? And I looked at the cartridge, like, this is Mega Man 1? That box art was so weird. But then I played the game and it was just crazy. And then reading the instruction manuals, because I used to pore over instruction manuals when I was a kid. You know, the first one was about Wily stealing his robots and reprogramming them. And then Mega Man 2 was about him building his own. And I thought that was super cool. And then in Mega Man 3, he's like, tries to be a good guy again to build Gamma, which then he steals and
Yeah, I love that they did that. That like a lot of the games would do that, have all this like pattern, this world building throughout the manual, like the monster descriptions and like the backstory for the like the Zelda titles. Yeah, the manual for Link, the Adventures of Link, is amazing. Better than the game because you said you loved it, and I was gonna fight you and tell you it was bad, but but I do like the game. Like I loved the game as a kid when it came out. I wanted to love it because of the music. But I don't want to get too off track. I think Scott, did you say your game yet?
Oh no, yeah, I brought up Mario Brothers 3.
Mario Brothers 3.
So Chris, what's one of your favorite games you would like to talk about?
Well, I mean, if we're not going into the deeper cuts yet, because we wanted to kind of talk about some of the lesser known ones, but if I'll go with some of my the Mario, the Metroid, the Zelda, I'm kind of torn here on which one of the more upfront ones to say, but just because I love it a little bit more, I'll have to say Blaster Master.
Oh, it's such a good one.
Blaster Master for NES is it's in my top 10 games of all time for any platform. Another amazing soundtrack. Naoki Kodaka did it, who did a bunch of stuff for Sunsoft. So if you've played a Sunsoft game, chances are you've heard other music from Kodaka, which is just outstanding. But that was one of the first Metroidvania games I'd ever played, right? That was one of the first game where everything was really connected, because I didn't get to play Metroid until after I played Blaster Master. So first off, the game just looks outstanding. The art direction in that game, the way it looks on an NES is still just, it blows my mind. It looks like it has so much more detail than it actually does, because it's just such clever art direction. But you can get in and out of the tank and run around as this little dude, and then you go into a door and it turns into this top-down thing. So it's this vehicular side-scrolling platformer shooter thing where you're exploring all over the place, but then it changes into a Zelda-style thing, and it's like, what? This is crazy. Yeah. But I remember starting that game, on the first screen, there's this little platform right in the upper left corner of the screen that just looks like it's decorative, and I just kept thinking to myself, I read the manual. I know I can get stuff that can make me fly. As soon as I get the flight ability, I'm going right back there because I'm going to see what's up there. So you get through World 1 and you get the gun that lets you blow up the frog thing to get into World 2. You beat World 2 and it gets you the gun that shoots through the walls so you can get to World 3. You go to Area 3, not World. You go to Area 3, beat that boss, which took me forever to beat that boss. Finally beat the thing with all the blocks that appear all over the room, gets the hover ability. It's like, yes. So I went all the way. I didn't even look for World 4. I didn't even think about looking for Area 4. All I wanted to do was see what was on that shelf. And what was on that shelf was more hover. So I grabbed that power up and I was like, okay. So I flew even higher. There was another one. And there was another one to keep refilling your hover. And I go down this, you find this other extra door up top. You fall all the way down to the bottom, go in the giant door. Boom, Area 4.
So that was the way to go and to beat the whole time.
It was the way to go the whole time. The game never ceases to amaze me on how incredibly, just expertly crafted, top to bottom that game is. It is so freaking good.
You know what? You're talking about because the game does look fantastic, and you mentioned it being a Metroidvania. As far as NES goes, I think it's a better Metroidvania than Metroid.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, because Metroid is too hard to parse where everything is because so much because it's such an earlier game.
Right.
It's harder to build a mental map.
Yeah, I mean, nothing against Metroid.
Yeah.
It's a work of genius, but it's effectively been replaced by Zero Mission. I mean, there's not a lot of reason to go back to the NES Metroid other than nostalgia. I mean, it is still. Okay.
I will say, I need to step in. I feel like I have to defend my girl and one of my favorite games of all time, because like talking about games that sucked you into the Nintendo, hearing the Metroid soundtrack, the title screen was immediately like,
oh my God. Oh my God.
What is this?
That's Hip Tanaka is what that is. That is Hirokazu Tanaka, one of the best composers on the freaking planet.
Three haunting notes, and I'm just like riveted by it. So I love that game, and I think the only reason to go back to it is not just nostalgia, but for historical reasons.
That's what I meant to say, not nostalgia, for historical purposes. Absolutely,
to understand the evolution of the early days of Nintendo. But I felt like as a kid that Metroid was easier to understand than what Blaster Master needed me to do. I'd get stuck in Blaster Master, whereas in Metroid I could eventually figure it out. You know what I mean? So like, I'll just say that like from my experience, it was sort of the opposite, right?
Okay.
But
I think it all comes down to the way you play it too, because the thing with Blaster Masters, I eventually figured that out just from playing it and beating my head against the walls, because the topography in that game is all very different. There aren't a lot of rooms that look the same, which is something that Metroid has a quote unquote problem with. However, with Metroid, I would agree
that it is not as fun to play Metroid 1 as it is to play Zero Mission. Zero Mission is Metroid 1, but better.
Yeah, and when I say if you're like learning video games or whatever, like if you're a kid, you want to get somebody into Metroid. Like if I want to introduce my son to Metroid, I'm not going to give him the NES Metroid because he's
totally agree. I wouldn't do that to my children either.
Exactly. Like if I want to get him into Metroid, but at the same time, I want him to see that, because seeing the 8-bit NES Metroid makes Super Metroid so much more impactful. Because it doesn't. Brinstar isn't visually designed after the Zero Mission Brinstar. It's designed after the NES one. So seeing that's one thing. But the thing about Metroid that really harkens back to the things that I loved about Atari games, and the way that I beat that one, was graph paper, right? It's like going back to the days of adventure and whatnot on Atari, because you couldn't really map out Blaster Master as easily, because it didn't even feel like I was getting super lost. It's like, okay, well, this is what this place looks like, and this is not what this room looks like. So I'll go to that room that looks like this other room. But Metroid is just labyrinth after labyrinth. So you just get graph paper and you start drawing screen by screen. This is what the map is shaped like. And that was how I made my way through that game. And I don't want you to think I'm besmirching Metroid. I just think that
I know you. Yeah. I know you too well, Chris. I know you wouldn't. I just felt like I had to jump in and talk about.
And that's fair. We were kind of poo-pooing it slightly. I do think maybe like I think Metroid 1 has more value as a historical context now than it does as a game in the world where Zero Mission exists.
For the record, just to clarify, I do not disagree with either of you. It is not that fun to play now. Like,
it is actually pretty fun to play on the Switch, though. With the rewind feature, it makes that game a lot more fun.
Yeah, actually, I that's one of the games that I will routinely replay once in a while. But like, that's for me, that's nostalgia. I know like it is very difficult to navigate.
I'm entering Narpa's Sword if I'm playing that game now.
yeah, Justin Bailey. Line.
No, I like her in the suit. I like Samus's power suit. It's just so cool. And with Narpa's Sword, you get the super thick freeze ray, which is all bizarre. But
anyway, we're just like I feel like we've lost anyone who doesn't actually hasn't grown up with 40 years of Nintendo.
Well, I will say my next favorite game I want to talk about is my favorite game on the console, and B is a contender for my favorite game just in general. And it might be a little surprising, but that's Kirby's Adventure.
Oh, what a good game!
Really good game.
Yes, great pick.
It's probably as an adult, it's definitely easy because it's a Kirby game they're designed to be. But as a kid, I felt such a sense of accomplishment with that, because it's the first game I 100%ed, and you had to really use your brain for some of the things you have to find. Because some of the stuff in levels you have to find, like only certain power-ups will hit certain switches or you'll be able to get through certain blocks. And sometimes you have to get those power-ups from another stage and bring them to the stage that has the switch and be able to navigate it and keep it throughout. And I think that was a fun challenge to like figure out what was to do. But I will say that game also did have a stage select screen as you unlocked more of it. But that was also
but that was very late.
Yeah,
it
that
was
very
super late. Yeah. That animation for him swinging the sword is just some of the
one of
coolest
my
animation
favorite
on the
things in
platform.
the world. That was my favorite
Also,
power up as a kid because you're swinging a sword and it's awesome.
exactly. He's great.
Yeah.
Kirby, now he's got a sword.
And
like
then you have to fight Meta Knight with a sword, and it's
that was so cool.
That was
and it was so
awesome.
weird, right? Because you'd played, I mean, if you were like me, you obsessed over Kirby's Dream Land before this, right? So Kirby's Dream Land is this super cute little thing, and all you can do is inhale bad guys and spin them out.
Yeah.
But then the NES one rolls around, and not only is he in color, but you can absorb powers now. And then you get this weird little mythology where it's like you fight Meta Knight, and his mask comes off, and he looks just like you, except he's all black. Like, what is that?
We can't figure it out. And then it had a big twist at the end. The whole game, you got to fight King Dedede, and it turns out he wasn't the bad guy.
Yeah, the nightmare was. And I do want to talk about one of the most impressive.
Yeah.
Just one of the most. If you've never seen it, just YouTube the whole last boss fight of Kirby's Adventure for NES, and I defy you to not be impressed by it. Just because it starts off as like a scrolling shooter, and there's multiple parallax layers of scrolling going on.
Yeah.
And then just the way the music lines up with the actual fight with the nightmare, because he shoots you down, and the music it kind of is. It's got this little like, and he shoots you down, and as you're scraping all across the ground and stand up, it's got this amazing rhythm where it just the boss shows up on rhythm with the music, which is not something you get too often in NES games. Where you get this scripted musical moment, but it is flawless. It is so darn cool, and it's such an amazing looking fight. And it's that game's out of this world. It does not get nearly the credit it deserves for just being so good. But there was a secret. I found every freaking secret in that game except for the one in Orange Ocean. It was like the second level in Orange Ocean. For years, I couldn't find that darn secret level. It was the only one I was missing.
But that's where the challenge in that game came from, because it's a Kirby game. They're designed, like anyone can, and they're super accessible. Anyone can play it and beat it. They're very not punishing. But that was the challenge in that game, where it was like, they find all the secrets, because a lot of them were very well hidden. Because I remember there'd be parts in the map. So as you discover stuff like your world map, like side-scrolling area, because you go through doors to go to the actual levels, would have big parts of it blocked off, and it would drive me nuts if there was like one door that was like blocked off, and I'm like, I got to figure out how to get to that.
And the doors would change colors only if you got everything in them. Yes. Right? They were dark orange, but they'd turn.
I'm just embarrassed to say I didn't realize that for a very long time. But when I did realize, I was like, oh my God, it was like a nice little subtle way to kind of nudge you in the right direction. The music and the graphics in it, it's so cute and so bubbly. Good. Like Orange Ocean, or no, sorry, Butter Building is one of my favorite NES game tracks ever. It's one of and a big part of that is nostalgia talking too, but I just really adore that game.
No, I think Kirby is one of those games you can go back to. And do you think it holds up? Like, there's a lot of conversation sometimes about like what holds up and what doesn't, and like how much is nostalgia. But I have two kids, and I've introduced them to obviously lots of video games already, like before they were even old enough to comprehend. Thank you, Chris, for the thumbs up. Really, what video games were, but Kirby is one of those games, and that just it resonates with kids. Like, it's easy to parse because it's like a pink blob and it's cute, and the mechanics are pretty simple. Like, we've played the game, like, and I say that like Kirby, like NES, and all the way through to the Switch. These games have the simple, really basic, like you said, Sky, designed for kids, and the fact that they have that accessibility and playability makes, I think, the NES Kirby game timeless, in a way that a lot of other NES games that kind of do need to rely on nostalgia because maybe they're a little clunkier or slower or like a little uglier than you remember. But I think Kirby is expressive enough, like looking at it, and the controls are so refined that you can go back to it and say like, yeah, it's so great.
Yeah.
Going out on a limb for Kirby there, I guess. But
No. You're not going to get any argument from me. In fact, it made me such a fan of Kirby. I kind of followed him over the years. I don't get every Kirby game because at a certain point, like as an adult, I'm like, I need something a little bit more challenging. But I
wouldn't buy him. I wouldn't buy him if I didn't have kids. To be completely honest, they are kind of boring if you've like grown up with games. But like if you are just being introduced to games, It is so great that they exist.
But I remember when I first started seeing stuff for the first Smash Brothers, I was like, oh my God, Mario, Pikachu, and Kirby. And I have to get this game now, you know? So
Kirby. This is what pushed you over the edge.
No, yeah, it really was that and Pikachu, because that was when Pokemon was hot.
That was mine, was being able to beat up Pikachu, because I was working at Funko Land during the Pokemon card craze, and I just hated Pokemon so much. So I was like, wait, I can be Samus and beat up Pikachu? Sold.
Chris, what's another one of your favorite games there?
Well, I will bring up this little guy here. This is Snake, Rattle, and Roll.
Oh my gosh.
This one got a little bit of just a tiny bit of a resurgence because it's part of the Rare Replay on Xbox One.
Mm-hmm.
This is from Rare and I'll also show this off. Sorry for anybody listening instead of watching.
You can watch it on our Facebook and our YouTube page.
This is the soundtrack to the game that was released on vinyl by Fangamer. And it is because this game's soundtrack is absolutely crazy. Like, this is what the record itself looks like. Just all like clear.
That's a phenomenal game. That is amazing. I have some of the Mondo Castlevania releases.
Oh, nice.
Have the special vinyl coloring, and I love the soundtracks and the artwork on them. That's good. That's awesome, dude.
I got a Shovel Knight on vinyl for similar reasons.
Very cool. So Snake, Rattle, and Roll is it's a kind of a 3D-ish platformer. It's done from an isometric view, which is something that Rare was really good with. They did the NES port of Marble Madness. They did RC Pro-Am. So that kind of the wonderful Cobra Triangle is another phenomenal example of a great NES game that's not quite on the layer of everyone knows this one. It's the super cool boat game. But Snake, Rattle, and Roll is like this. So you're these snakes and you go around. It's a 2-player co-op game, and you have to eat these little balls called Nibbly Pibblies. And every stage has a different one.
So British.
Yes.
Right? Every stage is a different kind. So like in this great animation of you're the snake, you eat the nibbly pibbly, and like say it's a pibble jogger. It shoots out of this thing, it sprouts legs and starts running around. So as soon as you eat it, you know, the snake swallows it and you see the thing go down the snake's tail, and then he spits out the 2 legs. It's
Chris,
hilarious.
This is amazing because I, as an adult to this day, still do not know how to play this game. I have tried so many times in the store. Scott's probably seen me do it, where like we get a copy in, and I put it in, and I'm just like, I'm gonna try to figure out Snake, Rattle, and Roll. And like 5 minutes later, I'm like, never mind. I still don't understand what the hell's happening.
All you got to do is you have to eat enough Nibbly Pibblies to gain enough weight. Once you eat enough pibbles, your tail gets longer, and once the last piece of your tail is glowing, then you can jump on the scale at the end, and that opens the door and gets you to the next level.
Wow.
The soundtrack.
That's what I'm going to do after this.
It's so cool.
Is it on the NES service on Switch?
No, because it's a Rare title, so it's only on Rare Replay.
I wasn't sure if they're NES games or something. They would probably they might.
I was about to go check because I'm like, after this, I'm gonna play Snake, Rattle, and Roll. I'm gonna beat the first level.
It gets really hard because it's a Rare game, so it gets obscenely hard by the end. But one of the things that really drew me to this game, besides the amazing visuals, was the soundtrack. And I talk a lot about video game music because I just love game music so much. But this soundtrack is done by David Wise, who you've heard his music. He did most of the music to the original Donkey Kong Country and its sequels, Wizards and Warriors. Like, David Wise's career is insane. He's written some of the best video game music there is, period. And this soundtrack in particular really was exciting to me because it's all designed after like 50s rock and roll. And the way that stuff is translated coming out of an NES is outstanding. So that this soundtrack was released on vinyl at all is amazing because it's such a weird kind of niche game. But it's one of the NES soundtracks that truly, truly deserves it because it's so good. My sister and I used to play the heck out of this game, and it's amazing. I definitely recommend trying it in any way that you can, but just beware.
I'm going to play it after this. I'm going to play it. I'm going to go fire up my emulator. I mean, my totally legal machine that I have. You brought out the vinyl, and you were talking about soundtracks that deserve a vinyl release. And I mentioned Castlevania. Like, I think that's another one that just is this perfect embodiment of like the weird awesome stuff that they were doing with the music on the NES, like this different, and specifically the Famicom and a lot of these, because Castlevania is a notable example since the Famicom, which was the Japanese equivalent of the Nintendo, for those who aren't familiar with that, had an extra sound channel that programmers could use when they're composing their music in the game. So when games programmed for that sound channel, I believe it was a chip in certain cartridges. I don't know if it was on the board itself, but and American versions couldn't do that. So you would lose like a whole channel of sound, and in most games it didn't really matter because most games didn't use up all of those channels. Most of them used them for like sound effects or just did not complicated music. But the Castlevania music was so layered and like amazing, and on the NES alone. And then if you go back and listen to the Famicom versions, it's even better. Like the music is somehow even cooler and more layered and nuanced and like emotive. It is such a cool series for that reason, and the fact that they were able to squeeze that out of this crazy hardware, from 40 years ago. That's like, I mean, even at the time, it wasn't expensive, right? Like the components inside the NES were not high end, even back then.
That's Nintendo's thing. It's kind of how they've always been able to really make money on their stuff. I have
And
two
yet,
questions for you regarding this. All right, thing number one, you talk about difference in sound from Famicom disk system to NES. Have you heard the Metroid title screen music from the disk system?
I have, yeah.
That's
Yeah.
some killer stuff. Thing number two, what was super interesting is that, especially with Konami, they did some really interesting stuff with the NES, bringing that stuff over, particularly like Castlevania 2 was a disk system game. I think it sounds better on NES, which is really wild because when you listen to the two of them, the music is actually more complex in the NES one.
That's a good point. That's a really good point. I'm mostly talking about, I should clarify, I'm mostly talking about Castlevania 3.
Oh, yeah.
Which is, that's the one that gets the massive upgrade when you bounce back to the Famicom version. But you're right, because of that is such a unique case. But go ahead. That's
no, I mean, you're right. It's a unique case. Castlevania 2, just they made the music more complex. They added more to it. And Zelda 2 is another example of that. Like the title screen music is way more complex on the Famicom one, but then in the actual game itself, the battle music is this really, really simple little melody. And then in the NES version, they upgraded it to a much more nuanced song, much more complicated song that you don't get sick of listening to for long periods of time. And there's a ton of changes between the NES and disk system version of Zelda 2, where the American version of the game is so much more interesting. Just if you're starting there, is all the castles looked exactly the same in the disk system version, whereas they had unique tile sets and colors in the NES version.
Wow.
So these
Actually
kinds of
didn't
like
know that.
You've got to switch, jump on the Famicom channel that you can if you have a Japanese account for your Switch, which is free to make, you can download the Famicom channel and you can play the Famicom disk system version of Zelda 2, and it will blow your mind.
That is
The
a
water
life pro
on the
tip right
map
there.
screen is animated.
I'm gonna go. Scott, I'll be right back.
Some of the other people I talked to who couldn't make it to this one are also big Famicom guys. It's like, listen, I also love the Famicom. We're definitely going to do an episode on that at some point.
Yeah,
so we'll circle back. We'll circle back around on. I mean, it's related. Famicom is great, but we'll circle back around on that. Sean, what's another one of your favorite games?
Well, I mean, I feel like I mostly got into it just now with talking about Castlevania, but just to explain what Castlevania is a little bit for anyone who's not aware of the series, it's a side-scrolling platformer action game where you are Simon Belmont, a vampire hunter, and you are going to kill Dracula in his castle. Castlevania, I think.
Yeah.
It's the name of the castle. But
it's a castle in Transylvania.
Yeah, it's basically the whole premise though is that it's like Universal movie monsters. And you whip at them, or like mythological beasts. There's zombies and wolfmen and Medusas and Frankenstein's monster and death and all of these horror movie figures and some, like I said, mythological things that you fight, all to this like really kicking soundtrack that is just like couldn't. Oh, it's so good.
Castlevania missed out on me bringing it up by a hair. I love the NES Castlevania games.
And the first game's kind of cool because it's like Mega Man that you mentioned, Chris, and then nobody having it for rent. Castlevania was a similar situation because it was part of that chip shortage era where like the games just couldn't be produced fast enough to meet demand. I don't remember the details around it, but like basically there was a supply chain shortage somewhere along there, and games couldn't be brought over at the rate we needed. So certain games would just be impossible to find. Mega Man was one of them. Castlevania was one of them. But I had, like I said, I had a bunch of friends, now that I'm thinking about this, that had NESs that I would go over just to play. Like in my neighborhood alone, I can count 3 off the top of my head. But like a couple of them had Castlevania, and that would be the game that I would go to. It was either that or Zelda if I got a chance to play it. Yeah, and I think I said enough about it, but yeah, Castlevania would be the other one.
Yeah, no, Castlevania is a great game. We'll probably talk a little bit more about it soon, because spoiler alert, it's October in a couple of weeks, and I have tons of horror-related things planned to talk about. So, but Castlevania is great. That one's on the Switch, right? I know at least Super Castlevania 4 is.
I actually don't think.
Oh no, you know what?
any
I'm
the
thinking the
Castlevania
Konami
NES
collection I
games
played on there because I bought that.
Yeah. I think so. Castlevania is one of those unfortunate series because it happens to be owned by Konami, who has decided that they don't like video games anymore, and they're not going to really worry about making sure you can play their video games. But it's hard to get sometimes, but also on every single platform ever. So
well,
if you want to play it, there's a way to play it.
I will say,
probably gonna have to pay money for it.
Konami's been putting out those like legacy or anniversary collections, if you're what they are, where one's like the arcade shooters, one's like all the Contra games, and then one is a bunch of the Castlevania ones, which has all the classic ones on it.
The phenomenal collection.
They're really.
That's what I mean. If you want to play it, you're gonna have to pay for it. Like it's not one of those games that shows up in like Nintendo Channel. Or,
but it's also it's like $20 for Castlevania 1, 2, 3,
Super Castlevania 4,
Super Castlevania 4, the two Game Boy games, all their Japanese counterparts.
I was gonna ask which version of
Kid Dracula.
Kid Dracula's on there. It's outstanding. That is great value.
And
the Contra one's really good
too.
It
comes with digital art and history books for each.
That's amazing.
Really nice collections. I really hope they make another one because there's so many more Castlevanias.
Because they're missing like Symphony of Night, Rondo of Blood, like all of that, the later stuff.
It's really just their early.
To hang out and talk more often.
Well, that's why I do the podcast. But like we covered a pretty wide variety of games right now too. But let's talk a little bit about me. I don't want to say undiscovered gems because the NES mines have been mined so hard that everything's been discovered now on the internet. But these games are maybe a little bit underappreciated and not talked about as much. We mentioned earlier, sometimes you go to a video store and you don't know what game you're going to get until you rent it. It was one of those situations, you know how like Blockbuster, that they didn't have the case anymore, it would just have a generic thing. And I rented a game called Gargoyles Quest 2 for NES. And as a kid, I thought it was Gargoyles like the TV show.
Oh.
I took that home and the game blew me away. It is so much fun. So I found out years later that it's a sequel to a Game Boy game I never heard of, which is a spin-off to Ghosts and Goblins, which I didn't play as a kid. Which obviously is a major, I mean, I don't want to say major, but was a bigger franchise for Capcom. But so it's like a side-scrolling game, and you have to get like different power-ups to like let you either fly a little bit farther, or you can like have new kinds of platforms or like projectile breath weapons to attack with. Like the big thing of the game is like it's very vertical, so because your character is a demon that can kind of like stick to walls, and you'll have limited wing powers. You have to kind of time out your jumps and your flight, and then there's an RPG system. So like as you do more things, like you can level up all your different stats. So like now I can fly a little bit farther. I can go back and get across this gap easier. Stuff like that. It's a really complex and great. I enjoy it a lot, and it's one of those things I don't hear anyone ever really talk about.
Yeah, that's a good one, man.
Well, it had an incredibly limited release here in the United States. Is probably why you don't really hear people talking about it much. It's fairly easily overlooked. The original Gargoyles Quest has been re-released a couple of times on the 3DS Virtual Console, for example. That was a Game Boy game. It did pretty well here in the States. And then, like you said, Demon's Crest is on the Switch right now. It was also on the Wii U Virtual Console, which is the third Gargoyles Quest game.
Which is a great game and is super rare, so it's really nice that it's widely available now.
But Gargoyles Quest 2 is also super rare. That's one of the more expensive NES games, and there's no good way to play it right now outside of
my collection back
emulation.
There. Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to remember that we have grown up, absolutely obsessed with Nintendo games for decades now. And then we have I love that we have tiers of oh, that's an obvious game, and oh, that's a deep cut game, and but most people don't really know beyond that the big titles like the Mario, even Kirby's kind of considered second tier really as far as I'd agree with that. The average person having played it on the NES, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's so funny because I'll reference stuff to people who aren't necessarily as nerdy as we might be, and they're like, I don't know that game, and I'm like, oh yeah, everybody played that game. It's Ninja Turtles.
well, then Sean, we have the opposite where I know with us specifically, it's Paperboy. People are always beating down our door for Paperboy, and we're like, people like this game this much? Not to say it's a bad game.
I know.
But
I feel like I brought this up before, but
it's just one of those surprising things. It's oh, I didn't realize that this is considered
right,
a must-have classic for a lot of people.
That game was a massive success on the NES, which is so weird because it's not the best port.
Right. No,
I remember loving it when I was a kid, but then I played the arcade version, was like, oh,
the handlebars.
And now I have a hard time going back to the NES one.
But it's one of those games. Every time someone's like, oh, do you have Nintendo games? I want to buy a Nintendo. They mention Mario Brothers, Duck Hunt, Paperboy.
Right.
Sometimes
so
Zelda.
These are the games that people are super familiar with, and there's the stuff that the people who hang out and talk about video games are oh yeah, those are common folk games, But I just think it's funny when you're Demon's Crest,
Yeah.
It's a good choice. It's just a super deep cut.
That's a phenomenal choice.
Well, it's become one of my favorite games. After I was done renting it, I never heard about it ever again. And then the rental store, because that was after Super Nintendo had been a thing. I think they got rid of all their NES games, so it's I never got to play it again until much later. And I was oh, I kind of rediscovered it. I was oh yeah, I vaguely remember this. And then I went through it and beat it. And it's a good challenging game. It's not super punishing, but it's also one of those games you kind of need to master its controls to get through. But it's just one of those games I never, even amongst our circles, I don't really hear people talk about it.
Yeah, it's worth a look, man. I gotta say, I'm familiar with the SNES game just because of the rarity and it finally being released on the SNES channel. But I didn't really spend any time with the one on the NES, so I kind of I'm curious of it. Hearing you talk about it makes me want to go back and try it.
Yeah, I've played almost none of it because, again, it's just not readily available anywhere. But I've played a lot of the original Game Boy one, and it's wonderful. And I keep hoping that one of these days the Gargoyles Quest 2 is going to turn up on Nintendo Switch Online.
So I'm not saying this because they're both Capcom games, but to go back to our Mega Man collection, Gargoyles Quest on Game Boy is Mega Man 1 versus Mega Man 2 of Gargoyles Quest 2, where it's the same basic gameplay, but it's so much more refined. And it's a little bit of a bad example because one's on a much less powerful system, and with a much more limited screen space.
You know what? It's more like Kirby. It's more like Kirby's Dream Land to Kirby's Adventure.
Well, it doesn't have the power up thing. I think is a little bit more of a radical.
Yeah, I guess that's a good point.
The formula for Kirby. But yeah, it's you get the idea though with that. So Sean, what's one of your more obscure games you'd like to let people know about?
Oh my gosh, did we talk about Zombie Nation?
Not yet. No.
On the podcast? No, on a previous one.
Oh, we might have mentioned it in another one.
Because that's a pretty awesome, obscure, weirdo game.
Yeah.
But no, I guess it's not super obscure, but Contra on the NES is a game that like I think still holds up and people should go back to
Oh,
and
definitely.
keep playing forever. Uh, I love that game. I think it's amazing that it's been so hard to replicate that formula. Like every time somebody tries to make a new Contra, they can't quite nail it. Like it happened with Contra 4, unless I couldn't get it past the split on the DS. Like
Oh, I loved Contra 4 so
Contra,
much.
it was good, but that split, man, I was so bad. My brain just couldn't track bullets from one screen to the next. I was like, yeah, I can't play this game very long. I own it, but
I
I'm
will
so
say
bad
there's
at
other
it.
good games in the Contra series, but they don't really play like classic Contra. Because like hard,
Right.
yeah, no, but
We just played Contra Force for NES for our Stone Age Gamer podcast, our summer series.
yeah, I
That game's
remember that.
awful.
Yeah,
Game is
Yeah, that is
we were
awful.
we were streaming
unfortunate.
that in store when you were doing it,
That
and
game is-
kind of laughing at you.
that game's putrid.
But yeah, no,
'Cause-
yeah, because even they just did a new Contra game and it was just bad.
Oh my god, it was
Very
so
bad. Your guns overheat.
Yeah,
And
like
Contra is a shooting game for people who don't know. It is a game that where typically on the NES, as soon as you get the upgrade to make your gun shoot faster, you just hold down the fire button.
Yeah.
Forever.
it's the
and
game,
it's,
kind of game
it's
Turbo was
ugly.
made
It had a
for.
terrible sense of humor. The game was no.
Yeah.
But the one on the NES is the first one, and I know it was an arcade game, I think first, and then brought over to the NES.
Yeah.
But it is so 80s, so like weird, machismo. The cover is basically just so. I think it is Sylvester Stallone and Arnold Schwarzenegger.
Yes.
That they took the artist painted over them. They used them as a reference.
and the Xenomorph from Aliens.
Right, I was gonna say,
Yeah.
and then the aliens that you fight, straight up face huggers and xenomorph, but it's guns and explosions and another rockin' soundtrack, and a cheat code that makes gives you 30 lives, the Konami code, which is absolutely legendary. And we
Nice.
talked
Konami
about
was on
And
top
it's
of their
legendary
game
because of
back then.
Contra, yeah.
they really were. They were doing so many cool things back then. And so like again, not super obscure, but I don't think they ever did Contra as well as the first Contra.
I think that's fair. I can't even think of other like shooting games that are like as fluid and
I
has
will
such tight controls.
I will say that I think Super C was a really worthy follow-up to Contra.
I do think it's a
Super
very
C-
good game.
I still would prefer the original NES Contra to Super C, but my favorite's Contra 3: The Alien Wars. Again,
phenomenal
I'm
game.
such a Super Nintendo guy. That leap from 8 to 16-bit is my favorite period in all of gaming, and I just think
Yeah.
Contra 3: The Alien Wars nails so much. It just gets so much right.
I think it's a phenomenal game too. For me, like I think there was a simplicity to the visuals in Contra that made it like it's super challenging but easy enough to like pick out where the bullets are and avoid them. Whereas like in Super C, Contra 3 Alien Wars, I would lose the projectiles a lot in the background and get like wrecked in that game. So again, it's just because I sucked at it. I didn't love it as much, and it's my bias. But I do think that it's an amazing game.
Also, the Operation C for Game Boy. That was a really
I've never
really,
played that one.
It's a solid Contra game. Also, the first Contra game with the homing missile in it. That's where that came from. Operation C is a really solid Contra game,
That's
and it's
crazy.
available on the Contra collection on the Switch, PS4, and Xbox One.
This is what I get for crapping on Konami without like making sure they haven't released any awesome collections.
I mean,
by the way,
They're
I'm on
awful
this-
now.
Yeah.
they are. But
awful.
I'm on the Steam page right now for the Castlevania collection, and I'm like about to pull the trigger and play this later.
It's a really good collection.
Worth every
and the
penny.
Contra one is arguably better if you're a Contra fan because there's things missing in the Castlevania one. There's like nothing missing in the Contra one.
Nothing of value.
Oh, yeah,
Like,
nothing of
Contra Force for NES is not on there. Like, I hated Contra Hardcore, but Contra Force on NES, we just did that on the show the other week. Like, I think you were thinking about when we're doing the pain in the ass
Oh, that is what
Contra
I was thinking.
Hardcore.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the third NES Contra Force, which is constant slowdown, plays nothing like a Contra game. It is just the hottest of garbage.
Well, speaking of the hottest garbage, Chris, what's one of your underappreciated games you wanted to bring up?
Oh boy, how many more of these do I get?
Well, you already got Snake Rattle and Roll. I'll let you have that one.
Okay. Because
Let me
I
look at the
have
rule book real quick.
yeah I don't know how long we're going, and I have
That's
two more that I really want to hit.
that's up to you guys. Let's just hit one and see
All right,
what
I'll
Nate
hit the
says.
one that I have sitting next to me right now, and that would be this gentleman right here. This is the first game in the Hebereki series, which if you're in America, you've probably never heard of because none of the games have ever been released here. But
I've barely
that
heard of
game,
Euphoria.
so
I
that
have
game
no
showed
idea
up
what
on the
this is.
Wii.
Yeah.
That showed up on the Wii Virtual Console for the first time in America. I had never heard of it before, but I watched the trailer. I heard about a couple of seconds of the music, also by Naoki Kodaka, same guy who did Blaster Master. And I saw that it was by Sunsoft. I said, well, that's enough for me. I love Sunsoft NES games. They did so much great stuff on NES, like that and Journey to Celius. So I bought it immediately for the Virtual Console. Now, on the Wii Virtual Console, it was completely screwed up because it was the European, it was the PAL game.
Oh, that sucks.
They were running through an American emulator. So it played fine, but the music was all off key. So, and I didn't know the difference. I knew that it was wrong because they played the actual version of the song in the trailer for the game, and it just sounds so wrong when you're playing it on the Wii Virtual Console. But the game was so good, I just stuck with it. And then they released it again on the Wii U Virtual Console, still with messed up audio. So I got this, which is a reproduction cartridge of the game with the audio fixed for play in an NES.
That's awesome.
And this is another Sunsoft kind of sort of a Metroidvania style game where it's a big interconnected world and you have to travel from point A to point B and get different power-ups, but the power-ups are kind of like different characters. You get these different characters you can switch back and forth between that have different attributes that let you get to different areas in the game. What makes this game so incredibly special is that it is bonkers. You walk around as this little snowman looking dude, and then there seems to be this white rope coming down. And so you grab one and you climb up top, and then you get to the top of the rope, and it's actually a string of drool coming out of this rectangle with a face where his eyes are like super far apart. And then you notice that so many things in this game have this really like demented, incredibly stupid smile on their face with just like drool and weird stuff happening all over the place. It is intensely bizarre. And I also didn't realize the first time I played the game for a long time that you have to you can actually jump on the bad guys to beat them. I didn't realize that the first time I played it because you have to hold down on the D-pad while you do it. Otherwise you just get hit. And once you get the hang of this game, it's really freaking good. It's incredibly bizarre, but it's got a really good soundtrack. It's a very, very late NES game, so it looks great. Like the colors are great. The animation is great. If you have an original Wii, you can't download it anyway. Never mind, because the Virtual Console is closed. You can download it on Wii U, even though NES emulation is garbage on Wii U, and it still sounds bad. But if you can find a good way to play this game, heartily recommend it. It's a bizarre one, but it's good.
We had it at the store recently. We might still have it available for purchase. It's on.
No.
Yeah, I recognized it as soon as you brought it up because I remember being like, because that was the first time I had seen it when we got it traded in. I was like, what is this thing?
Wow, you had a trade. It must have been, was it a repro cart for America or was it a PAL cartridge?
It must have been a PAL cart. But I remember being like, I didn't even looking at the titles, like, how do you even say this? Because it's like really funky and 90s looking.
It's the letter U, then the word for, because there's 4 characters to choose from in the game. Euphoria, the Saga. What a weird name.
I'm looking at pictures of it right now, Chris, and there is this little, like, it's a little ball face, and the eyes, like you said, are wide set apart, and it's got this smile that goes all the way across its face, and it has this little line under the smile to give it like a little lip, and I love it. I love it so much. I want to play this game.
Can't recommend it enough. If you have, I mean, there's not much of a legal way to play it right now. Not that I like super support emulation or anything, but if you have something like an EverDrive or some sort of other nefarious means to play this game, get your hands on it. It's a really good one.
So
this is so cool.
So Chris, you mentioned you had a second game on deck. What was that?
That would be Mr. Gimmick.
Okay.
That's another one that I don't think it ever got released in America until a PlayStation 2 collection that was just terrible. This is another a great example of a game that had a really cool soundtrack in the Japanese version as opposed to the PAL version. Right, the Japanese version had this extra chip in it that made the music just incredible. This is another late Sunsoft game with really good graphics. You're this toy doll thing that looks kind of like a little adorable green demon dude, and you can summon stars and throw those stars around, and the stars kind of like bounce all over the place, and you can then use those stars as platforms or as weapons. It's a pretty challenging game. It's one of the best looking NES games. It's got a lot of really impressive backgrounds and bright colors and great animations. It's a pretty tough one. It's also a hard one to get your hands on. It hasn't had a solid re-release. Like I said, there was like a PS2 collection that had this on it, like a Sunsoft Classics collection, and they just butchered it. It's nigh unplayable. But
So unfortunate.
This is one of those games that even like I think the PAL cartridge or the Famicom cart also go for a bunch of money because it's got a pretty decent cult following, and rightfully so, because it is. Once my friend Sal turned me on to it. He has a whole YouTube channel called Salcade. He's a really cool guy. I used to work with him back at Game Crazy.
Oh my god, I love that you keep dropping these like old defunct video game retailers like Funko Land and Game Crazy. I love it's so good.
So he turned me on to this game because I was talking about Euphoria and how much I liked that game, and he's like, well, have you tried Mr. Gimmick? And I was like, well, I've heard of it, but I've never tried it. And so he sent me the ROM that has it corrected so you can hear the original Japanese audio playing through and a US emulator or whatever. And I finally played through the game, and I was just simply blown away by it. It is incredible, and it's heartbreaking that they haven't put this on. It was never on a Wii Virtual Console or hasn't shown up on Switch, and I'm just begging for it to happen because it's such a great candidate for it. It's one of those games that's like very well worthy of its reputation because just about anybody who knows about it is like, oh no, that game is great. That is one of the best NES games, and it really is. It's such a wonderful and amazing game. It's pretty linear. It just goes stage to stage, but in each stage, I think in order to get to the actual ending of the game, you have to get these secret hidden items. So you have to like find this little secret hidden path to get this one secret item. Like the first level, it's a big plant or something, and you get all those things, and that's how you get to the real ending of the game. Like you're a toy that's come to life for some reason. Story's nonsense, but the game is out freaking standing, and such a good soundtrack. Really good music.
I'm so excited to play these games.
So catchy. Big thumbs up from me.
Man, it's funny because I feel like over the years I kind of got jaded. There was nothing new under the sun for me in the video game world. I'd seen it all, but I've really hadn't, and I loved whenever something would show up in the store that I'd never heard of before, or like I'd be talking to you or someone like you that would drop something on me where I'd like, how did I miss this title? It never fails to surprise me that there's still stuff to discover for me, someone who has spent so long talking about and playing and like living and making a living from video games. Mm-hmm. There's still stuff out there to discover. It's awesome.
Yeah, and
I'm happy to be of service in that regard.
and like I said, it's especially amazing with the NES because like since like the beginning, I would say for the last 20 years or so, once the internet's like speeds were kind of caught up with what people want to share, online video gaming stuff, like people just talk about NES games. Like I guess because people of a certain age like us were old enough to kind of be taking the reins on that. But even just thinking like early YouTube, like Angry Video Game Nerd and those guys, like there's so much people pouring over the NES library for things that it's amazing that there's still stuff that can surprise us.
Yeah.
It was Japanese and Scandinavian. That's it. It wasn't Europe. It was released. It was released in Scandinavia.
That's really weird.
It's so weird. And I remember always hearing about this game. I feel like I heard about it in like an EGM a long time ago, where they were just covering import stuff way at the end of the NES's life cycle. Because this was 1992 in Japan. So, Super Nintendo and Super Famicom were out. And then it didn't get released in Scandinavia till 93. And so it's one of those really late NES games like Euphoria, like Little Samson, that have this really cool look to them. That's like they really refined what they were capable of doing with the NES by this point. And it's such a shame that more people haven't played it, because it's really, really worth tracking down.
Yeah. I'm not going to bring up Little Samson because that's a little bit too hard to find.
Yeah.
But I know one of the obscure games, we talked a little bit ahead of time about, I didn't know which one I was going to pick, and I've decided what I'm going to pick, and it's none of the ones we talked about. I'm going to bring up a little game called Guardian Legend.
Yes, Guardian
yeah.
Legend.
I've had a chance to be looking at my NES collection during the course of this discussion. I'm like, you know what? That's a really great game, and it's not as hard to find as the other stuff I was going to bring up. But it's a great hybrid game, because I think it starts with like a Galaga type shooter, right?
Starts with a scrolling shooter.
Yeah, it starts with a scrolling shooter, and then you're playing morphs into this girl, and then you become like a Zelda type over the top game, like your isometric perspective, like adventure game, and you're fighting like you're in a Death Star or something, and you're just kind of fighting your way through it. And then isn't there a third game type in it? It's been a minute since I played it.
I don't know about a third game type. I've
but
never
I know,
actually finished it, but I think it's just the two.
But I know it bounces back and forth between those two at least, and it keeps it mixed up. And there's like light exploration. I don't want to call it Metroidvania style, but it is a little non-linear. It's more like the first Zelda, where it just kind of drops you off in like a little bit of a map, and there's different screens you can move through. And then it goes to like a bullet hell like shooter for parts of it. But it's really unique for the system, because usually games are one versus the other for those styles. Like there's only a handful of games I think that mix up the genres, and one of them is Bayou Billy, and that game stinks.
I'm so glad you mentioned Bayou Billy,
Yeah.
but before I say something about that, have we defined Metroidvania? Because I feel like that's a term that might not be as universal as it is within our circle.
Fair enough. We have mentioned it a lot, and we have mentioned Metroid and Castlevania
without making the connection. So I think like
it's an exploratory platformer where
right,
the focus of the game is more, there is no, this is the beginning of the level, this is the end. There's a giant world, and you explore that world.
Yeah, usually interlinked and with gatekeeping that includes like finding an item to unlock the new area. You know, that might be a power up that you get to keep with you, and it's also useful throughout the rest of the game.
So and it requires like backtracking and like being able to remember like, oh, I can't reach this yet.
Right.
You just keep it in the back of your mind. And I will say, like, I think all Metroid, like regular Metroid mainline Metroid games, not counting like Metroid Prime Pinball and stuff, kind of stick to that formula. But the Castlevania games don't always do that. In fact, at this point in NES, they were not. They were very linear.
Yeah,
which is wild, particularly because like it really does go back to the beginnings of the franchise, because we know the NES Castlevania, which is a stage-by-stage arcade-style action platforming game, but the MSX version of Castlevania, Vampire Killer, which came out like a month or two later, it was being developed at the same time, is more exploratory. It doesn't do the stages like that. You have to travel around a stage, find keys to open doors and all that business. And then Simon's Quest is just straight up that kind of a thing. It's a big open world with backtracking and stuff. So even though it wasn't like in America, it's not out of the gate a game like that, because then, Castlevania 3, Dracula's Curse, both of the Game Boy games, Super Castlevania 4, Castlevania Chronicles on Genesis, like that series didn't actually really do that until Symphony of the Night, but it dabbled with it all the way back to its origins on the MSX, and then Simon's Quest.
But I would say Symphony of the Night is when Castlevania became a Metroidvania game.
Exactly, that's really when it got
absolutely there. And also just because I know this little bit of factoid, I believe the term was coined by Jeremy Parrish, who is a games journalist who kind of like loves this genre and wanted a way to talk about it and just like mash the two together, and it stuck. But yeah, no, I'm glad we talked about it, because I noticed we had said it a few times. I'm like, that is, I don't know if everyone knows.
And you know what? I think we brought it up a lot in our Super Nintendo discussion as well, because I know
probably
we talked about Super Metroid in that. I can't remember if we talked about Castlevania 4, we definitely talked about Super Metroid.
We did talk about Castlevania 4.
Yeah.
But
I'm
yeah,
still
no.
so bummed that I wasn't there for that. I wanted to talk about that.
Oh yeah, I guess
I wanted to be on that episode so bad.
Full
You
disclosure,
were missed.
we tried to get Chris in on that because he literally helped write the book on Super Nintendo games.
Yeah.
I also literally helped write the book on NES games. There's an NES. Brett Weiss, the same author, has 2 NES volumes coming out, just like Super NES.
Okay,
And,
I didn't realize they were on their way.
They are indeed.
Probably.
They're on their way, and I was involved in those as well.
Well, we'll
We
definitely
should probably started with that, right? Like, hey, we've got the guy who wrote the book on Nintendo.
Well, I didn't actually write the book. So
the guy who helped write the book on
You
Nintendo.
contributed to it. That's
I did.
guy
Yeah,
who is
Brett puts the whole
involved in
thing
some
together,
way.
and then he got a bunch of people from all over that are involved in writing about games and stuff to tell stories about them. And so he listed every single game, and then he gets these personalized stories from all these people that have been involved in some way, shape, or form to tell them about this is what you did with this is how you experienced those games when you were young. They're really fascinating books. It's the Super NES Omnibus, available now at Level Up Entertainment.
I think we still have volume 2 at least at the moment. I keep it up at the front register right now. But I mean, hey, let us know and we'll pre-order you those new books.
The NES Omnibus volumes 1 and 2 are definitely coming out. They're a thing.
Can you give us a little bit of a little taste? What's one of the games you contributed for in it?
You know what? It's been a long time since I actually did it. I don't remember. I think I know I wrote something about Jaws, where because he likes these personal anecdotes about it. So I wrote the story about how my sister and I used to rent Jaws for NES, and she was always better at the game than I was. And the thing with Jaws is that like shells, like conch shells and whatnot, are the currency in the game. And so you collect enough shells and you go and get like the Jaws tracker, or you power up your boat or whatever. So I had a conch shell that somebody brought me back from a beach once. And so she would be in the bedroom playing Jaws, and then I would be like in the hall, like across the hallway in the bathroom, like washing the conch shell that she would like give to me and be like, all right, well, this one's worth like this much, and then this one's worth this. But like we would pretend we were having that exchange back and forth, just like in the Jaws game. And
that's awesome.
It was wonderful.
That's great.
Cool. All right, so we have if it's anything like the Super Nintendo book, no stone is left unturned. I think you guys talk about every Super Nintendo game that was released in North America.
Yep. And the same thing with the NES one.
Yeah.
Every single one.
So there's literally something for everyone in that. Because I'm sure you're not unique in being the only person that, let's say, likes Jaws, which is usually like considered kind of low tier NES game. But just like, just how every comic book is somebody's first, every video game is somebody's favorite. And even though we're mostly talking about like our personal like picks, but like we're not even like no one's even mentioned Punch Out yet.
I had written Punch Out to talk about, but you could do a whole series on just talking about NES games.
Oh yeah, we could be here literally all night.
There's just not enough time to mention every single amazing title.
Well, if you want a series about NES games, you mentioned Jeremy Parrish earlier. Mm-hmm. He has this YouTube series called NES Works. He also has Game Boy Works and whatnot. But if you've never seen Jeremy Parrish's work, it is absolutely incredible. I actually had a really cool experience with him recently where so I do marketing for Stone Age Gamer, and we do like flash carts and whatnot, which are these cartridges that you can load the ROMs onto SD cards, put them into the flash carts, then play them without the use of emulation, which is really nice. So if you want the authentic experience, it basically just tells the system this is what's in there. So Jeremy started doing Game Boy Works Gaiden, where he's talking about the other platforms that were on the market at the same time, and we supplied him with an EverDrive Game Gear X7. So the first volume of the Game Gear Works, or Game Boy Works Gaiden with the launch titles for Game Gear, that just came out on YouTube, and I'm the one who
I just watched it.
He mentioned Stone Age Gamer, and I'm the one who hooked him up with that.
Yeah, I remember he said Stone Age.
So proud of that.
I remember he said Stone Age Gamer, and I was like, oh, I know someone that's from that, and then I didn't even think to be like, oh, was that you?
Yeah, I had a whole email correspondence with him. In fact, I have back when I worked at Funco Land, they had, when they stopped carrying stuff like Game Boy boxes and whatnot, I scooped up as much of that stuff as I could, and I've been holding on to it for years and years and years. And I know a bunch of it's worth a decent amount of money, but I follow Jeremy on Twitter, and he was talking about how hard it is to get boxes and stuff. So I just wrote him like, I got a ton of these boxes. Do you want me to just send you stuff? And he was like, yeah, you can send me a couple. That would be great. That would be amazing. And so he sent me this spreadsheet of all the stuff that he's looking for. And I sent him a box of like 50 Game Boy boxes.
Awesome.
And he responded is like, I thought you were going to send me like maybe like 3 or 4. This is insane. I was like, dude, use them. All right. They're going to get, I would much rather see them used in your historical works series than sitting in my closet gathering dust. Right.
That is
I would so much rather see that happen. So
well, let's gush about his historical work series real fast. Have you watched it, Sean?
No, I haven't actually. But Jeremy Parrish was a contributor to, I want to say, rpgamer.com back in the day, which is how I first came across him. And I remember, like, he's the reason that I got into Evangelion, because he used to have this like a thumbnail theater where he would like summarize the episodes of the Eva in like kind of a tongue-in-cheek, like sarcastic way. But I didn't realize he had gone on to done that, because it's been a few years since I've been following him. I used to listen to Retronauts pretty regularly. But now that I'm hearing about this, I'm like, well, I have homework. I have like stuff.
It's good time to watch now, because he's got a ton of stuff in it on his channel now. They're very well. I love them. They're very well in depth. They're very well. The production value on them is very good. I have the first NES volume, so it's like the launch games in book form. The books are very in depth. There's lots of great photos. In the book, he goes so into detail with how the light gun works. And like why it only works on the TVs it works on and not, newer ones. I was like, oh, okay. And I've been able to pass that information along to customers, talking about refresh rates and stuff. But like it's a really great series, and I highly recommend it.
It's awesome.
If any of this has sounded remotely interesting to anybody, watch it. He's done some N64 ones. It's not just been NES. He's been doing like Game Boy ones currently.
He's done the first couple of guided episodes on the Atari Lynx.
Yeah, I would say he did Atari Lynx.
So interesting.
He has been, the dude is prolific, and it's awesome to see how much he's done now. Like while we're talking, I'm pulling stuff up. Like, well, I've got some stuff to catch up on.
But awesome. That's
cool.
It's one of those things. Like it really nails that NES aesthetic, and something about it I just like. And it might just be because I had it as a kid, but. It's one of those things that just attracted me to, like, it's my favorite system to collect for retro gaming. My collection is nowhere near complete, but like personally, all the things I'm really looking for I have now. That's one of the fringe benefits of working at the store that we do. It's one of my favorite consoles to collect for, and I love talking about it. We will definitely talk NES games again. I'm sure we will talk about these things privately again too. But unless you guys got any final thoughts on the NES,
I love it. It's one of the best systems ever. I don't know, man. It's wonderful. It's a classic for a reason. God, you mentioned Mike Tyson's Punch-Out. Like there's just a bottomless well of games on this platform that I still love to regularly play. My wife and I just played Dr. Mario yesterday. Just a nice versus Dr. Mario on the Switch. Although the best Dr. Mario is on N64, but I digress. There's so much fun to be had on that platform, and there's so much still left to mine. Like even stuff that's not actually like discovered, but undiscovered, just widely discovered. Like I mentioned, those two games. I thought you guys would know both those games. Like, oh yeah, those games. I love the Mr. Gimmick. Yeah, I know about that one. Like. I
had heard of Mr. Gimmick.
I've
never played Mr. Gimmick. Euphoria, brand new territory.
No, I knew of Euphoria, but that's because I worked at the store and we got one in and I had to learn about it. I will say, like, there are some great games that people didn't get a chance. Like, we got Little Samson in a couple years ago, and that's such a rare game that we're like, all right, this day at work, because it was like the next day I was off, I was like, we're going to just beat this game so we can say that we've played it. Like I think it was me and Becca's husband Brian. We just played it on the TV there, because that's like a $1,200 game. so we were never going to be able to play it again. But like that's another one. It's just like it's one of those ones that's just, you know, because it came out so late, they just fell to the dustbin of history, as it were.
That's a good game. It's a really solid platform.
I really enjoyed it. Sean, you have any final thoughts?
Just, you know, I feel like we would be remiss having an entire episode about the NES without talking about like the experience of actually trying to get an NES to work.
True.
Which is integral to anyone who has ever tried to actually play a Nintendo game growing up when they were actually systems that you could buy. For those who are younger, maybe, and or haven't shopped in the store, or maybe you know never purchased an NES and seen it there, they don't always work. Even when they were brand new, the mechanisms, at least in the American consoles, kind of you would front. It's a box. To describe it, it's a box. It opens. You slide the cartridge in. This is a cartridge. We flashed a couple of them. There's pins. There's contact pins that slide into the system, and then you push it down. You close the little door. But which
is insane.
Yeah. Right.
It's
like a VCR. It does not need to be. Literally,
that was the whole point of it. It was because of the whole.
VCR,
nobody wanted to carry video games anymore in the United States. So they wanted to make it look like an entertainment system instead of a video game. So instead, they made this weird thing where you got to bend the contacts into place.
Right, and the net effect of that is like you over time you'd be pushing down on the contacts, and instead of just sitting in there like you would any other like ROM to motherboard configuration. It pushes it down and then it gets loose so that you put it in by like the third or fourth time. You all of a sudden you're like, you have to blow on it. That's what the trick everybody did because it introduced moisture to make the contact. It worked, but it wasn't great. To shimming it back and forth, to jamming another one in on top of it, just the right angle.
Every single person had a different way to get their NES.
Stick it in the freezer or something like that.
And you would know, like everybody had their ritual, right? Like someone could come up and like tap it and it would work, and you would spend 15 minutes trying to get it to go. So like that was a thing from day one almost.
Yeah.
Like that was.
Oh my god! Or when they'd start glitching out in the middle of a game. Right, you got it to work finally, and then you start playing it, and an hour in, it just starts getting all funky looking. Mm-hmm. Or you got to you're playing Ninja Gaiden, right? Another great series. We didn't even mention it today. So you're playing Ninja Gaiden, and you get to a boss, and you get so angry, you start stomping on the floor, but you stomp it on the floor, jars the cart loose, and then your game's over, and you got to start over again.
Yep.
Back in my day. No, I will say, like even working at the store, like putting brand new 72-pin connectors in them, like. Even right off the bat, like they're still such a pain to get to work. And like, I don't know, that's just one of those things we usually are very upfront with people when they buy the original box. Nintendo's like, listen, 30 years ago, this didn't work properly. And like, it's not going to work right off the bat every single time. It's just how that console's designed.
There are two consoles that I have I've regularly talked people out of buying when I worked at the store, the NES and the Atari.
Me too.
Like, just guys, I know you want to play it. And like, here's some options to allow you to enjoy these amazing games in a modern, convenient way. Please don't buy the system. It will be back tomorrow. Oh no, you're going to pull your hair out trying to get it to work.
I don't know, man. I had pretty solid luck with Ataris.
Yeah,
you never know.
They're from the freaking 70s.
Well, Chris, here's the problem: is people don't realize you have to play with all these dip switches, and they're all different for the different games. So like, it's one of those things, I can't get the game to work right, and they just get frustrated and bring it back.
Why is this only in black and white? How come I can't start the game? You have to hit the reset button.
Yeah.
It's insane. Anyway, we're way off track. The whole point is, like, that's my final thought, is that, some of these games are worth going back to, but the experience of playing a Nintendo is kind of singularly unique in the video game history, that it had this, in America, I should say, at least.
Yeah.
It was this revolutionary system at the time because these games were fun and fascinating and engaging in a way that video games hadn't yet managed to be at home. But it also kind of didn't work great most of the time.
Yeah.
But like, you stuck with it and you loved it, and it was a unique experience. I think it's worth mentioning.
Oh yeah, I wouldn't trade that as part of my childhood for anything.
Yeah.
Oh, definitely.
I will say my final thoughts on the system from working in the store for over 13 years now. I I know customers are always routinely shocked when we mention this, but like, it's amazing how much like the young generation, like kids and teenagers, are still into the NES and old
Absolutely.
video game consoles. Like
Yeah.
it's one of those things that never has really gone anywhere for people that are into video games. It's just something about like all of the classic games for it like have that lasting Nintendo appeal. Like this year we're celebrating the 35th anniversary of Super Mario Brothers. That is a game that people still will pay for.
It's still fun to play.
And it's still fun. Yeah, it's still fun right off the bat. There's so, and you know, a lot of these games have like this charm and a polish. Like Mega Man is, for all intents and purposes, made by Nintendo. He fits so easily in with like Super Mario Brothers 3 for like from like a graphical standpoint and like an artistic standpoint. And like there's just something about the NES. It has this weird charm. Like when people usually make like retro games, if they don't make a 16-bit one, they clearly are inspired by the NES. Like I mentioned Shovel Knight earlier. Great game, but like the indie game development like scene like has a lot of stuff that tries to emulate the feel of an NES game. So it's something that still permeates I think the mindset of people that are into video games still. And that's, I think, really impressive. And in a way, like nobody talks about Sega Master System, you know?
Yeah.
Like,
not in America.
Yeah.
head down to Brazil. It's a different animal, or Europe.
Well, we're in America, so that's the only thing.
They're
that
making
matters.
Genesis down there in Brazil, I think.
I know that
Yeah,
they're
they
still
are.
making Master System games down there.
But yeah, the Master System had no traction in America. And I mean, you look at that thing and it's pretty easy to tell why. I mean, marketing, I don't know what they were thinking with those boxes, man. Like,
they wanted you to do graph paper. They wanted to remind you of homework.
We could have a whole episode on the box art.
I might have it do
the Sega Master System games because I freaking hate and love. Anyway.
Yeah. I also have a love-hate relationship with that. But you know what I mean? Like,
totally.
like people don't talk about ColecoVision in the same way. Or
it was Nintendo.
Yeah, every video games were just called a Nintendo because of the NES.
It was a gigantic success. Revitalized the whole industry here in America.
Oh yeah, no, there's so many gaming historians. Another good YouTube channel going to watch his video on the origin of Rob for how the Nintendo kind of saved the video game crash.
Yeah,
I love Rob. He's so cool.
I do too, but
he's not to play with.
He's not to play. He's just cool to have.
Yeah, he's a cool thing.
Unless you're playing with him in Smash Brothers, but I think that's gonna wrap it up for this episode for us because we can go on all kinds of tangents.
Yeah, you got to stop us.
Yeah, I got to nip it in the bud. It's starting to get late now, and I don't want to edit a longer one than I have right now.
Fair enough.
But thank you guys so much for joining me and for giving me your time. I love talking Nintendo. I'm sure we'll talk about it again at some point. Thank you guys for listeners for watching us. We're now on iTunes, we're on SoundCloud, Spotify, we're on our website levelupentertainment.com, we're on our YouTube, we're on our you can watch this on your Facebook. So there's all kinds of ways to like watch and share this and get it out there, and I appreciate any likes or ratings or whatever format.
Yeah, just smash that like button.
Yeah, ring that bell, give us 5 stars, yada yada. But yeah, so that'll do us for this time. So until next time, stay safe out there.
Can I make a quick plug, please? Please?
Oh, sure.
We were just talking about all this Nintendo stuff. I also have the privilege to write for a physical magazine called Nintendo Force. Ta-da! This is a wonderful physical magazine. It's the follow-up to Nintendo Power. After Nintendo Power went under, Lucas Thomas, who worked for IGN at the time, decided that this would not stand, and so he gathered a bunch of other people across the internet to make a physical magazine that follows up on the heels of Nintendo Power. And I was a huge fan of it, and for some reason at a certain point they let me write for it, and now I'm a staff writer for it, and it's amazing. It's like $5 an issue. You can jump on their Patreon. There's an issue comes out every other month. They still come with posters. This is the new one. Came with this poster.
Oh, I had that. Oh, I had a lunchbox with that exact art on it.
Isn't it great?
God. That's the Famicom art for Super Mario Bros.
It is.
That is awesome.
This new current issue has got a whole thing where we broke down year by year Mario's history, which was super awesome. That's very excellent cart down there. So yes, Nintendo Force magazine, check them out on Patreon. It's a really for $5 an issue or however much it is an issue. I don't remember exactly how much it is, but you get a free poster in every issue and a physical magazine, and it's so good. And I'm not just saying it because they let me write for it. It's a great magazine.
Yeah, buy it. I'm sure you've spent more on worse. Get it?
Yeah. I don't doubt that. Well, again, I'll say goodbye one more time. Thank you guys again for coming on. Thank you for listening. So until next time, be safe.